I've been young, I've been old, I've been hurt and consoled. Heart of cold, heart of gold, so I'm told. I've been lost.
Hey everybody, SevsDeadSerious. How are you? I had a former student of mine. Actually, a lot of my early followers here are former students of mine when I was a teacher, high school teacher in the city of Philadelphia. And there's huge problems in the city of Philadelphia. I'm kind of giving you a little up front on it. Right now, they're looking at a $306 million deficit on a roughly $2+ billion school budget. It is a atrocious school system. Even though it's kind of funny, the very best school in the state is a public school in Philadelphia. It's called Masterman. It's in downtown Philadelphia, and it's the creme de la creme de la creme. It's an all-magnet school, special admit, all academic kind of thing. Good baseball teams for whatever reason. I guess baseball players are very, very thought-oriented. So anyway, they actually have the highest SAT average in the state. But many of the school I taught at was atrocious. I mean, it was built in 1914. The building was decrepit pile of shit. I mean, it was a horrible building. You know, the Alumni Association had actually fought back in the 90s to keep it because it's a historic old building, which is great. It's an historic old building falling down. It's been a school since 1914. When they built the building, it actually had sconces on the wall that still around the auditorium when you walk in, where they used to have the oil lamps. And the entrance to the school is marble. You know, it's a magnificent old structure. But, you know, the almost 100 years of being a school have pretty much led to its demise. It's just a costly pile of shit. And many of the schools, Overbrook High School, there's a lot of schools that are just decrepit. I mean, they're just horrible buildings. I mean, they were built back in the teens, 20s, 30s. I can't even tell you the number of buildings in elementary or middle school. I mean, it's just atrocious. Some of these buildings are just decrepit, and you know, I mean, there's no money. And you know, the sad fact is, I hate to say this to all my former students, but nothing's going to be done about it. Nothing can be done about it. It's a problem so vast that it doesn't really matter. They're developing a permanent underclass that come out of the Frankfords, the Overbrooks, the Dobbins, the Bartrams, the Roxboroughs. They're developing a permanent underclass. Will certain students rise out of the underclass and make it possibly to the top? Oh, sure. That always happens. But honestly speaking, the chances of it happening are so infinitesimally small in the current system, it doesn't really matter. What are the problems? Teachers, parents, communities, governments. The fact that the system itself was designed in 1830. You know, I mean, the only schools that are going to work right now are the schools that realize that it's a 12-month process, number one. Number two, you know, it's STEM, it's science, technology, engineering, math. I mean, it's all about that kind of stuff. Sad to say, historians like me, we're like a dying breed. Sure, will there always be jobs for a couple of historians out there as professors and stuff like that? Absolutely. But realistically, no. And then, you know, another problem, teachers. You know, I mean, as many good teachers as there are, I can walk into any building in America because I've done some subbing in the white communities and, you know, the lily whites, as I refer to them. No, the lily whites, where all the little freckle-faced kids are. You know, great, you know. But let me tell you something. A third of their teachers stink. They suck. I mean, I've seen them. I mean, they hand out worksheets. They do nothing. I mean, the school I was at, my God, we had tons. We had a third of the teachers. They handed out worksheets. They did absolutely no teaching of thinking skills, progressing, anything like that. It was just a total waste of time. And parents, you know, it's easy to sit there and say, well, the schools are lousy. You know, in my career in public schools at this particular high school, I never had more than 26 parents come into my classroom during open house. I got cursed out when, kids had 15, 20 absences and I flunked them. I mean, unbelievable stuff. We had families come in looking to beat up kids. They would come in one of our unmarked exits. Do some of the charter schools work in the inner city? Absolutely. Absolutely. They've got a system there called Mastery Charter. They're extremely successful. They do a great job. That's what education is becoming. It has to become community based. And you're not going to see it happen through the public system because it's just too bloated with bureaucracy and BS. And it's also hamstrung by this partisan politics. The sad fact is the state of Pennsylvania could bring the money because we're the only state, and Corbett is such a crook. It's almost Blythe the way he is, where he just literally is not only does he rape the people, he rapes the land. And the fracker thing, he could easily, it would mean over $700 million in taxable income. In taxes that would come into the state if you were to tax the frackers. And those are the guys, the frackers, the ones who go and they break the rock and it produces this gas and they suck it all up and it's petrol. It runs things. So obviously we need it. We need it now. We want it as much as we can get because the oil companies are making hundreds of millions of dollars, hundreds of billions of dollars, trillions of dollars. And we're not taxing them. They do it in Texas. Texas doesn't tax anybody for anything, and they tax frackers. So I guess I don't get any claims they're making jobs, but the numbers are so inflated, so bloated. It's all bullshit. It's typical. And I do believe one of the problems in places like Philadelphia has to do with race. I do believe that there is racial politics involved. It's almost like the state wants to keep a permanent underclass of poverty. The kids who get out, but the parents who and I fault a lot of parents. If you're not out there trying to get your kid into a charter school when you know your kid's going to go to an Overbrook, a Frankfurt, a Bartram, one of these high schools like that, I'm not going to go and name all the bad high schools in Philadelphia because Lord knows there's enough of them. But there's just a couple, and the sad fact is if you're not trying to get your kid into Mastery or a school where you can get control, then I'm sorry, you're not going to get a pity pot out of me. Did the district have to close schools? Absolutely. Should they have closed 25, 35 more? Absolutely, yes. But the problem is they're eventually going to have to replace some of these schools. And see, that's the real problem is that the federal government refuses to spend money on what's called infrastructure, which is roads, bridges, and schools, public places where people go. And these buildings in places like Philadelphia, like Detroit, like these large inner city areas were built back in the teens, 20s, and 30s. And they're totally ineffective buildings. They've fallen apart over the years, not because they were bad buildings, but because they've been used hard. It's like a car, man. You can't drive a car forever. Eventually it wears out. Buildings do too. But when you keep out prosecuting wars, first Iran, Iraq, then Afghanistan. Well, it looks like we're about to get out of there. And now we want to go and, stick our noses into Syria. We feel bad when the banks get, we bail the banks up. We do nothing for schools. They just signed a $8.6 billion contract to build V-22 Ospreys for the United States Navy. Okay, why do they need them? Why do we need so many of them? They're building enough to cost us $8.3 billion. And the fact is that our schools are falling down. No, in some of the wealthier suburban areas, yeah. But let me tell you, they got the problems there too. They've got problems too. Listen, yes, most of their kids go on to college and that kind of stuff. No one's going to argue that their problems are less. They have poor teaching too. Let me tell you, that is a huge problem out there. They have parents who don't care. They have kids slide underneath the mat, just like they do in inner city schools. And now you keep taking money away. I wrote my master's thesis on the changing face in the African American community as it relates to education. And you have to start looking at things differently, because the public school system that was supposed to protect you as provided by Brown versus Board of Education, and it hasn't done it, period. End of discussion. You go into places like Frankfurt High School, and every kid there is, well, I shouldn't say every, 95% of the kids are minority. You're building a permanent underclass. I mean, that's a fact. Most of the kids who come out of that school, remember, out of that school, 50% do not graduate on time. 50% do not graduate on time. Let me say that number one more time. Less than 50%. It was 49 point something last year. Okay? Those are atrocious numbers. That school has failed. It should be shut down. What are you going to do with the kids in it? See, the sad thing is, you have to bring some other management in, because obviously the people who are there right now are doing a lousy job. It's tragic, but the last couple of, have taken money away from the system and brought in based on ideology and not what's best for students. It's always about ideology. It's never about what's best for the students. And that's a big, big problem. Because when you get all this ideology, and it was involved in Paul Vallis, and I came with Vallis, and I believed in his ideology, by the way. And I'm not going to sit there and say that I don't have my ideology, because I do. Absolutely not equivocally. There's no question about it. But the problem here is, with all this ideology, we forget about what we're here for, which is to educate. Now you have a huge deficit, and that was brought on by Ackerman, and the fact that, she came in and it was all based on race. That's one of the reasons I got run out. It's all race. It's racial politics. We don't want white people teaching black people. That was her attitude. She felt that they could do a better job, and I didn't buy it as a teacher, and I don't buy it today. I'm a professor now, and I do a great job as a professor. Most of my students, again, are African American, and guess what? They all think I'm a wonderful professor, and so in the for what it's worth category. So the problems in Philadelphia the whole structure is a mess, and it's not going to be cleaned up. The only way anybody in the city of Philadelphia can do anything about the problem is to get your kid out of the mess. Either you get them into a magnet school, you get them into a charter school, you get them into something else. Because if they get stuck in one of the comprehensives or one of the schools that you have no control as a parent, you as a parent can go and control a school. But again, don't just lay the blame. It's funny. All these people showed up, when they said they were going to close all these schools. How many of them have actually been inside the schools that they were worried about? And, when you take a look, they look like a lot of people out there. But when you're talking about closing 20 plus schools and the crowd is only 1,000, well, that's a pretty sick number as far as I'm concerned. Where's everybody else? There's too many people who just don't care. And the only way you're going to straighten it out is for the government, the federal and state governments, to take and make education a priority. Instead of oil, instead of, partisan politics, instead of all the other crap that they argue about. We go out and we can build all this military hardware while we watch our children fail. It just doesn't make a goddamn bit of sense. The sad thing is, not many people will see this rant. Because I'm still new enough that no one will see it. And that's okay. Because eventually someone is going to see it and they're going to start passing it along. Because it's about time for someone to start taking a realistic look at education in this country, especially in inner city areas. And it's not just Philly. Trust me on that. It is not just Philly. There are plenty of cities out there just like this. And those kids are becoming a permanent underclass. And the sad thing is, you're going to have to pour in billions. The same way you do into fighter planes and military aircraft carriers and all this other military humbo jumbo. And wars, we build more new schools in other countries than we do. And don't even get me started about prisons, because we're about to open another 1,000 bed prison in Pennsylvania. So we can put away more young African American males who've been busted selling less than $100 worth of marijuana. Are you effing kidding me? You don't give them an education and then you bust them for selling weed. Are you really kidding me? Are you serious?
I've been young.
Man, I am dead serious when I say you people got to get your shit together.
I've been hurt
Because I'll tell you something, one of these days, with all them guns out there and all that anger building up, they just might come out to your neighborhood.
So I'm told.
Peace.